Welcome back to the She Does This podcast, where we have conversations with real women on how they do it. I'm your host, Jordy Lucas, and this week I'm joined by newly crowned Miss Universe Australia, Maria Thattil. Join us as we discuss the impact of inadvertent racism, why we seriously need to ditch the term brains and beauty, and Maria's grand plans for the future. She's an inclusion advocate on a serious mission. Here's my chat with Maria Thattil. The 2020 Miss Universe Australia, Maria Thattil, thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
Thank you, Jordy. I am really, really good, really excited, and I'm still getting used to people saying my name and Miss Universe Australia in the same sentence, so it's exciting.
I can imagine you must be just buzzing still, and yeah, it's still a sense of it being surreal. How was the competition this year? Because I'm guessing it was completely different to what you thought it was going to be.
It certainly was, and I think the best way to think of what the competition was is to think of what this year has been, and it is just completely aligned to that. It was unexpected. We needed to pivot quite a lot, and it was largely virtual. Just like we all are living in the digital space, and it was very unique. And I think that it's great because a lot of people would imagine what this program is. They think it's events, they think it's shoots, they think it's, the international trip. But when you strip all that away, you see what it actually is. And you see that there are women who are thinking outside the box around, well, what am I here for and how am I going to do it anyway? So it was crazy and different, but I'm so grateful that I was able to be a part of it this year because it was a whole other realm of support in what's already been a pretty different.
So I want to hear obviously more about the competition and your journey to getting crowned, but I want to go back to the start. How was growing up for you as an Indian Australian? This is something that you speak about a lot. I want to know what that experience was like for you.
Yeah, and thank you for opening up, your platform to having these discussions. I think sometimes it can be a little bit uncomfortable when we're talking about things, but in order to progress and move forward, we need to be able to speak authentically. And it is an experience, particularly as, what we call a third culture kid, where my parents immigrated to Australia early in the 90s and then I was born. So I grew up where they had pretty much brought over, their Eastern traditions, Indian culture, norms, food, music, clothes. And then I was growing up, going to school, being around peers who were more used to, I guess, a Western context. So for me, it was feeling like I constantly needed to choose between two different identities. And it was thinking, well, I'm not Indian enough to be Indian, but I'm also not Australian enough to be Australian. So it's constantly compromising elements of who you are to fit whatever the context you found yourself, in. So a lot of that growing up was thinking I needed to denounce elements of my culture, thinking I needed to change my personality and also build a bit of a shell because where there was limited representation of what it was to be an Indian Australian, people had ideas about who you were and where you came from. So I needed to build a bit of a shell and take, maybe even unwittingly racist jokes in my stride. And I thought I needed to allow this in order to fit in and belong. So growing up for me was feeling like I needed to compromise different identities and thinking that mistreatment and being othered is normal and it's something I should have accepted in order to fit in, which is definitely something in my 20s have grown out of.
Yeah.
But, it's disappointing when you look back on it and it takes a lot of personal healing to be able to speak about it.
And you talk about sort of casual racism. I think Australians are so notoriously bad with casual racism. And you're saying now that it's something that you don't deal with as much in your 20s, or do you just call it out more and don't put up with it anymore? Is that more the case?
What I think is that all of us, no matter where we are in the world, and this is something that, the Black Lives Matter movement has definitely brought to the forefront of conversations. A lot of people have different ideas about what it is to be racist. And sometimes people think it means, overtly hateful actions or thoughts or ideas. But what we're learning now is casual racism is the result of people not understanding what racism is. And what racism is it's a system that we're all born into. that conditions us to have these unconscious biases. And, people who are loving and, they don't even mean any harm, they might not realize that there are, things that they benefit from within the system,
Mm.
or they're perpetuating it. So when you have casual, instances of racism, I'll still get things like, "You're so pretty for an Indian." And I think reflects the idea of, you mean well. And this actually happened to me as recently as right before COVID hit. I was out for dinner with my girlfriend, and a couple came up to me and had said that. And I was, quiet about it and just thought, let's just have this nice dinner. But it was my best friend who got up, and she's, not a woman of color, and said, "Hang on, just letting you know, when you say things like this, it has an inference tied to it around, well, in order to be, pretty, you cannot look like a South Asian because South Asians look a certain way." So I think it reflects, a lack of intentionality in what we're saying. And people usually don't mean harm, but that's why it's important to have these conversations, because it's often not ill intentioned.
You mentioned before about things that perhaps someone who is not of color may benefit from things in the system that a person of color wouldn't. What are some of those things that we might not even be aware of that we're benefiting from that we don't even realize?
Yeah, I think, it's things like, and I'll talk, for example, in the context of beauty. It's realizing that, okay, growing up, a lot of my friends who are not people of color didn't realize that we experienced exclusion and, that sense of being othered within that industry in small things like our color of makeup not being available in stores. And
Mm.
it's things like growing up and not even questioning and having the privilege of not realizing that it's so easy for certain people in our community to see themselves represented in certain spheres, but, perhaps there are people who don't. And
Mm.
I think that is a privilege and a benefit that, I've really loved seeing people, wake up to and use that to then call out, okay, this is what we could do better.
How did that affect you growing up as a young woman?
I think, when you don't see yourself represented, or you think you're excluded from certain spheres, I think it certainly shapes your ideas about what's possible for you. And I know that's really true because doing things like, what I've been doing now, I've received messages from women and men who are, either people of color or, potentially from a community that has been excluded or marginalized. And it's things like saying, I never thought in my lifetime I would see
Mm.
this. And growing up as a woman, I thought, well, maybe it's not possible, but you kind of follow the breadcrumbs, which is, what I like to say, I think I did in terms of opportunity to opportunity. And, if you told me maybe 5 years ago you would have done something like this, it would have seemed impossible because it's a really big feat. It's like, how would I even pull that off?
Mm.
But growing up, I just sort of had to unlearn little bits and pieces and tackle one thing at a time to be able to ultimately get to a point where I am able to show up in certain arenas and speak about the things that matter.
And so you studied, you've got a degree in psychology. You are just hearing you speak, you can tell you're incredibly intelligent. What was life growing up for you like, going to school and studying? Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, I think I loved studying and
Mm.
really really loved school, and I wasn't really a sporty kid, so I was definitely more in the book. But I love psychology, and going into tertiary education, that was what I thought my career was going to be. I was very planned, and at 18, I thought, well, I want to do something that helps. Clinical psychology is going to be it. And yes, that's ambitious, but I could not have conceived of the career that I've got now because it just is not something I could have even dreamed of. I hadn't seen
Mm.
it. So I had a former uni peer reach out to me and had said,
I was going to bring this up.
yeah, and you know what? It's important that I don't shy away from this conversation, no matter how it's going to be received. This is something that happens to people, women, and people who don't fit conventional molds. It happens to them in many different arenas. And the message
Mm.
I received, a direct quote, was that this peer remembers sitting with other women who had said, "How did she get here?" And whether that was an assumption of how I looked or the way I presented myself or whatever it is, it was people looking at you and thinking, well, how are you taking up space here? And then going into my
Mm.
master's, I took some time off and I decided I'm going to do a master's degree in management. And at the same time, I also decided I wanted to do a makeup qualification. And I distinctly remember a peer of mine saying, "Are you going to be one of those makeup girls?" And for me, it reflected an idea of if you do something, in the creative sphere, or if you pursue your hobby of makeup, you are, automatically, more shallow. Perhaps there's a lack of substance there. There are these connotations
Mm.
around certain hobbies or passions or interests that box people in. And for me, it was really important to show up anyway and say, I can do the social media thing, but I also graduated with honors and was offered and nominated for a scholarship to Harvard. And that's what people don't know. But you do not have to subscribe to other people's beliefs. And that was something that I very quickly learned when I realized that my interests were competing based on where these interests are pigeonholed.
Just in doing some research before our chat today, I noticed that a lot of media outlets describe you as brains and beauty. And it's something that I noticed that men don't get described that way.
Mhm.
Men don't get described as, oh, they're handsome and they're
Yeah,
smart.
yeah,
It's this idea that women have to be one or the other.
yeah.
What's your thought on that? Why do we think we are like this with women and not men?
And that is exactly it. And we often talk about the double standards, and we never say, we'll look at him, he's extremely handsome, but he's also intelligent and powerful.
Mm,
And why do we do that to women? And it's because the narrative has been for a while that if you show up as someone who is confident and perceived as beautiful and sexy, that means that that quality is mutually exclusive to intelligence. And even just
mm,
saying, like, I don't really like it when people use this in media about me and say she's beauty and brains, because it implies that that's a
mm.
rare combination, and it's not. And I speak more passionately about this. There are women who, are beautiful in many different ways. First of all, there's no one mold of beauty, and that's something that I'm always talking about. But the fact that we put beauty and attractiveness, we pitch it in a way that we have to call out that it can coexist with intelligence. It
Yeah,
implies that there's a belief that it doesn't. So I think that that's really dangerous. And I also think that, I've noticed in, certain media outlets where these conversations have been had, beauty and brains,
yeah,
there's also been conversations around makeup and showing up as a professional and being too focused on how you look. And I think it also fits into that. And I think the reason this happens is because these are the things that have been used to control women and to keep them small. So what do you do? All of a sudden, women
mm,
own their sexuality and women own their intelligence and their sexiness, but they can show up as leaders and they can be whatever they want to be. It's like mind blown
yeah.
because for so long that hasn't been the narrative. So, yeah, no matter what's written, I'm still going to show up and exactly as I want, and letting other women know they can too.
So you've got a massive presence on social media, and that was something that I did want to bring up with you. You've got over 64,000 followers just on Instagram, and you have been creating these posts about sort of challenging the narrative. What else are you passionate about using your social media for? I know you have Mind with Me, which is a really great series where you discuss things like this and challenge perspectives and ideas. What else are you trying to achieve through your social media?
One really big thing I'm trying to achieve through social media that I think is super timely right now is, yes, we're talking about inclusivity and we're talking about diversity and
Mm,
empowerment and challenging the narrative. But one big thing I want to show people through social media is you don't have to be afraid to use your voice on topics that are scary and maybe they are complex and maybe, you have approached it previously with the fear of saying the wrong thing. I want to show people in order to, pursue progress, you need to be able to come to the table and respectfully dissect and discuss your opinions and your perspectives and be willing to admit when you're
yes.
wrong. Because so often we see on social media, people might read, something, perhaps it's a false headline, and they read it and they hold it to their heart to be true. And they use that to defend their stance on something in a way that's fueling hatred and anger and
Mm,
vitriol. No one is going to grow with that. So for me, Mind with Me was born because it's a space where you know what, we are going to open a conversation on sexual harassment, and we are going to open a conversation on mental health, because, and I say to people, even if you disagree with me, please come and share your views, because it's valid, matters. So I want people to know you can do these things with respect. The last thing the world needs right now is more segregation and divisiveness. And my platform is going to be used to champion love and unity, always.
Mm.
So that is one thing I really want to drive home.
Why do you think we have lost the ability to respectfully disagree with each other? Because
Mm.
it's very rare to see a constructive conversation online where people are respectfully disagreeing. I feel like you're either on one end of the spectrum or the other. There's no in the middle, and both sides of whatever argument is being had.
Mm.
Why do you think we can't just respectfully disagree with each other online?
I think there's a number of things that influence the fact that we don't see a lot of healthy discourse on important topics. And I think, firstly, I often talk about the ego. And when I talk about that, I mean, okay, what are people's mental models of the world? And many people, they are not willing to look beyond the limiting frameworks of how they see the world. So immediately when you see something that challenges what you think about certain
Mm-hmm.
people, about certain communities, about the way the world should be, you see this defensive reaction because they see it as a compromise to themselves and where they sit in society. So people are going to get angry and they're going to defend their points tooth and nail because that has
Mm,
to do with a really strong ego. And I also think with social media, now everybody has a voice and an opportunity to say what they want to say. But the problem is, in a virtual, faceless, non physical arena, people disassociate from the impact of their words and they dehumanize
yeah,
people. They dehumanize people that they other, they dehumanize people with the platform. And it's easier to say unkind things because you don't have to see the impact of your words. But that's why it's so
yeah,
important for people who incur this to give that human element and say, for me anyway, when I've received this, I've I will never respond with the same energy, because at the end of the day, if that person has a little daughter watching this, I would want them to learn from how I'm responding as opposed to seeing
mm,
the hatred that is so easily tapped into. So I think it's easier to hate because it's harder to break down perceptions you have of people and the world, and you want to keep them digestible. And that means buying into assumptions.
yeah. I find it so disturbing. You say that, someone might have a little daughter. Sometimes if I'm on someone's page and I see an awful comment, and I'll like flick onto that person's profile and they've got photos of their children, and I'm like, what is your child growing up
Yeah.
with a parent that can speak or name call like this? Like, I find that really concerning.
It is, and that is it. It's concerning, and as much as for me anyway, your instant reaction is to maybe feel a little bit angry and to internalize
Mm,
what you're reading. I've actually just had this, and I'll give you an example. I had a woman comment something really hurtful on one of my posts, and when I clicked on the profile, it said "mother of four," and she had put the emojis, and it was three little boys and a daughter. Now, that particular comment, if her children see that, her sons are thinking it is okay to attack a woman, and her daughter's thinking it is normal for women to be against women. So the way
yeah,
that I responded was saying, what I'm going to continue to do is to do the work that I do so that your children grow up in a space where they don't have to be bullied online like this. And you
yeah,
just remind people like what you do, it comes back, and you have a responsibility. But a lot of people don't think of that because, like I said again, you disassociate from the other person and you think, maybe they've got a following or there's someone I don't resonate with, so I can say what I want. But your
mm.
children see this, and that should be enough to make you think twice about putting more hatred into the world.
Did you get a response?
No, no response. No response.
How
So,
surprising.
I mean, what do you say when someone responds to you with love? And one
Yeah,
thing that I've always read, it's like, when you get into arguments with people or if they're spewing hatred, you just can't argue with more love and enlightenment and an inspired perspective. The most they can do
mm,
is send you a different insult. But again, it's wasted energy because you're not engaging. You're engaging without
yeah.
engaging. So that's important.
So I'm sure that your perspective and your knowledge on this subject certainly helped you with your journey through Miss Universe. What made you want to apply for this competition?
Mm. I think, I recognized it was a platform above else, but also
Mm,
I've talked about representation, but I saw how different all the finalists were last year. And I mean different
mm,
not just in, the overt factors, but different in their backgrounds, different in what they wanted to do with the platform if they became Miss Universe Australia. And then I thought, okay, maybe I could do this and make it my own. Maybe I could be a part of it.
yeah.
And then doing it, I recognized what a profound opportunity it was. And I started to realize, above all else, it's actually a leadership opportunity. And you have a platform where you're influencing people at a national and potentially a global scale. And
Yeah.
it was something that I thought I was up for. So, I believe in the message I'm putting out there. And I know that my values are strong enough to see me through any hatred or negativity and things that come with having a bit of a public platform. And
Yeah.
that's why I wanted to forge ahead, because the vision was greater than anything negative that might have come with the experience. And also, I knew I'd leave with new connections, with friends above all else. And I have.
Mm,
So it's been very, very enriching.
yeah. And I'm sure when you applied, what you envisaged the journey would be like is very different to what it was with COVID.
Mhm.
So, talk us through what the process was like and the lead up to you being crowned and how it differed perhaps from previous years and competitions.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting because when you're preparing, for example, the Victorian girls, all of us at home, we were pretty much national finalists from the confines of our bedrooms, of our homes. From March onwards, we
Mm,
had to do the whole program from home. And, it does present its challenges because you want to be a part of the incredible things this program offers. But what I need to say is Troy and Sophia Barbagallo and the Pink Tank Events team, they went above and beyond to connect us. And I mean, they a Facebook
mm,
group, they had group chats, they sent us care packages, they even sent us technological
oh,
equipment like mics, ring lights, so that every girl had the exact same technology to be able to show up in the best possible way with the circumstances. So doing it from you kind of have to ask yourself, how can I turn this into an opportunity? And it's things like, okay, right now all my living is done in the virtual space. How do I get myself strong and impactful in that way? So it forced you to think
mm,
outside the box. But one of the things they talk about is, resilience, flexibility, grit. You don't develop these qualities when things are going right. So if you perceive it as a challenge
mm,
as opposed to I've lost something, I'm lacking opportunity. If you think, what can I actually gain from this? Your perspective enables you to turn it into something wonderful. And that's why I think I was able to push through with that support.
and you talk about that there's a program. I think a lot of people take issue with this competition. Perhaps
Mm,
maybe they believe that it is too much about how
mm,
these women are appearing. And I think it is important to acknowledge all the finalists are beautiful,
yes.
physically
Hmm.
beautiful women. What else goes into it in terms of your personality, your values, your morals? What does the
Hmm.
program offer?
Yeah. And I want to acknowledge that I understand why people have these conceptions about what Miss Universe is. What I will say, yes, all the finalists were beautiful women, but what I loved is if you look at the finalists, you are starting to see different ideas about what beauty is. And
Mm,
I've spoken about people saying, this is what I think of Miss Universe and the program. But when you see women who show up, who challenge outdated ideas about what it is to be beautiful, that's a step forward. And that's
mm,
already a ceiling and changing a norm so that many different kinds of women can show up and say, actually, I'm beautiful as I am. And there
mm,
is an element of presentation, but I think it's really important for anyone, men, women, whoever you are, to take pride in how you present yourself, however that looks. And when
yeah.
we talk about the kinds of preparation, there is a huge mental and physical element to it. And when I say physical, we had women of all shapes and sizes doing it, and it was about being the fittest and healthiest version of yourself and
Mm,
walking in your skin with pride. So for
mm,
me, I'm a naturally petite woman, but I'm a little bit heavier on the bottom. But I really wanted to get strong for this competition. And, doing that and maybe even in lockdown and not having access to, your standard health and fitness opportunities, I still was really proud. You know what? This is how I am, and I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
And talk about the mental prep. It's about mindset and it's about confidence, particularly in an arena where, externally people are comparing you to each other and people
Yeah.
are weighing in on their opinions and they're talking about your capacity for impact. So, what I think the women get is they come into this program and they learn to navigate being in a society that actually judges them on how they look. And it gives them a platform to say something and to do something and to
Mm.
have that confidence to be mentally strong enough in who you are and what you're doing that you can show up in any arena and walk with pride. And one of the best things I'll just say, I actually just finished my first walking lesson with a coach.
Yeah,
And
right.
yeah, and what she is, and a lot of people would say, oh, it's just how you walk. But what she had said to me is, you, it's about how you carry yourself in any setting. Because she was telling me that, she actually had like a personal situation a day before she filmed a tutorial for us. But she said, no matter how much pain you have in your heart or what you're going through, you walk with your shoulders back, your head high, and you
Mm.
walk with confidence. And, funnily enough, prior to giving this podcast, like I said, I was actually on the receiving end of a little bit of, trolling on the internet. But
Yeah.
I still put on my clothes, got ready, showed up for the day, and I walked with confidence because no matter what people say or what they do, they cannot bring you down, and you still
Yeah.
walk with your head high. And it's qualities like this that I think me a year ago, I wouldn't have been able to do this.
In terms of how you present physically, there have been things that I've read because you are a petite girl, 5'3". I'm 5'2". Short girl problems. I get it.
Yeah,
Does that play into your mind
yeah.
going into the international competition that you will be on the shorter side and typically the girls will be taller than you? Like, does that play on your mind at all?
Not at all. And it's funny I was speaking about it with my national director, and I actually think it's a strength because I've never understood how the number of centimeters you stand tall, the weight you have, what that has to do with
Mm.
your substance or your capacity for impact, because it has nothing to do with it. And I've always operated out of that belief, and that's why I've been able to do this. So now what I'm able to do is actually go to the international stage, and I'm able to represent women who have been told you're not enough. And in order for you to be valuable, strong, powerful, deserving of an international platform, you need to have a few more centimeters on your height. And when I say that out loud, it's so ridiculous. But for me, I actually think it's a strength because what I've been able to do now is show up in a space where maybe people told me I couldn't. And I know that when I get to Miss Universe, they are going to look at me and realize that Miss Universe isn't someone who meets a certain height requirement. She is someone who shows up in a leadership capacity. She empowers other people and encourages them to break
Mm.
norms. And that's exactly what I'm doing. So I don't see any weakness in it at all.
So, what's the international competition looking like? Because obviously, international travel is off the cards for gosh knows how long. Have you got any insight as to what it's going to look like for you all competing?
I wish I did, Jordy, but honestly, no idea. And that's the funny thing. It's the
Yeah.
marker of this year that nobody knows what's around the corner. So
Yeah.
just 24 hours before our national final, we were preparing to do it from home like this. And then 24 hours before we got the go ahead, when restrictions eased and we're like, yes, we can meet. And the team organized the event within 24 hours. So that,
Oh, wow.
yeah, that's the kind of, uncertainty and ambiguity we're operating with. And I'm ready for it. So I
Yeah.
don't know, but I'm preparing as if I'm going to be told, Maria, get on a plane next week.
He's hoping.
Yes, I
So, what do you want to do with your platform? What are the big goals?
Yeah, the big goals is to grow what I've been doing on my platform currently with a bigger scale, wider reach, and it's going to be used to create a community-based social enterprise. And I've always said I wanted to become Miss Universe Australia not for the purpose of this 1 year, reign. It's about perhaps like
Mm.
legacy. So I want to use it to amplify and grow a community and to empower women and young people to show up as a leader in their own lives right now. And I know that through Mind with Me, I've been able to facilitate conversations that matter, build connections that span globally. So I wanted to
Yeah.
do that in a formalized setting where people can come, show up, and take away tangible value, and that is what I invest my time in. So it's given, and that's another thing that the program has done. You do have access to financial resources and a network of people who
Yeah.
can actually make your educational or business dreams come true. So now I'm working with a team to bring that to life. So it's very,
Yeah.
yeah.
We had Tegan Martin on a few episodes ago who won, I think it was the 2016 crown. And she just said as well, like, the amount of doors that it opens for you is incredible. It's so much more than just that year. And I mean, you're following in the footsteps of Jennifer Hawkins and, you know, Tegan. It's an incredible opportunity. And I'm sure that you're feeling really excited about the potential.
Absolutely. I think I'm excited but super motivated as well, and trying to be very strategic about what I do. And I don't want to look back and think I've wasted even a second of working towards making the things I want to achieve a reality. So I'm feeling really motivated. Those girls are phenomenal. Like, I've had them all reach out, and Priya and Olivia and Cheska, and it's like, wow, like, you've got this team of incredible women behind you and who want to share their learnings, and I'm so lucky to have that. So lucky to have that.
Yeah. So I just want to finish. If you could give girls growing up who are perhaps finding themselves in a minority or they are being othered, what would one piece of advice for them be from you?
The biggest piece of advice that I find myself even turning to right now is never ever let somebody else's perception of you dictate your worth. I think that we need to carry with us a responsibility to make a space that is better for the women who are going to come after us, because it's all good and well to show up for ourselves, but there are women everywhere who need, they need us, and we need to uplift each other, because we're working against a culture and a system where we've been told that there's one spot and we need to work against each other to get there. So I tell people who have been othered, take your experiences and use it as an opportunity to create space for someone else. And that is exactly what I plan on doing.
Maria, thank you so much for your time, your generosity. We're going to be watching on and hoping that you do get to jump on a plane and compete and represent Australia. So proud to have you representing us. You're an amazing woman. All the best.
That was very generous, and I just want to say thank you. Thank you for giving me, the opportunity to share a little bit about this and talk about things that I hope will serve and help other people. And fingers crossed, I get to get on that plane and I make it hard.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm sure you will. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I'll be back next week with another episode of the She Does This podcast. In the meantime, you can follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Just search She Does This. Give us a follow and keep up to date with the latest from the site. Have a wonderful week.